Friday night, kids in bed. Rick Stevenson popped a bag of extra butter popcorn while his wife Melanie grabbed the Coronas from the fridge in the garage. She left the garage door open when she went out, and Rick could feel the cool night air coming through it. "We have any limes?" Melanie asked as she walked through the door with 4 dewy beers. "Not sure," Rick said. He meant to ask her to close the exterior garage door, which he had noticed was up when she was outside. But Melanie kicked the inner door shut behind her. Rick shrugged and decided he could just remember to close the garage before bed. Melanie set the beers on the kitchen island, careful not to let the glass bottles clink together. The kids had only gone to bed about 20 minutes prior, and while their oldest, Kelsey, understood the basic concept that adults like to have fun too, and without kids sometimes, their son Dawson would not stand for it. If they wanted to enjoy a peaceful night to themselves, they would need to keep quiet. Even popping the popcorn was a risk, but a risk, they agreed, worth taking. Somebody apparently didn't want them to have a nice quiet night, though. Right after the microwave stopped, someone pounded on the front door inconsiderately loud. Thinking it could only be someone in urgent need of assistance, Rick put the popcorn bag down half-opened and hurried through the living room to the entryway. He flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. "Oh no, not tonight," Rick thought when he saw the distorted face on the other side of the door. It was one of their next-door neighbors, Adam Eckel. The reason Adam's presence upset Rick, besides the late hour, was really Rick's own fault. Adam's wife, Nikki, was a friend of Melanie's, and, unbeknownst to her, closer than a friend with Rick. Earlier that year, Adam privately came out to Nikki as gay, a secret which he thought was only shared between the two of them. In Nikki's opinion, this gave her full liberty to find satisfaction in Rick. She did not share the constant guilt that hounded Rick's every thought, especially in the company of his wife, who sidled up beside him now. "It's Adam," he whispered. "Oh, it's after 10 for crying out loud. Don't open the door." Adam Eckel knocked again. His fist looked gigantic, tapping the wood right next to the fisheye peephole. Adam's face looked tired and vacant, and a little dirty. He wore a tan t-shirt with a ripped pocket on the left breast and black cargo pants. If Rick didn't know better, he would have thought Adam was a construction worker just getting off of a long shift, but Adam was an HR representative for a mid-sized insurance company. Rick was surprised to see he even owned cargo pants. "Just ignore him," Melanie begged, tugging on Rick's hand. She could not have known how much Rick wanted to do that, but "I already turned on the light," he whispered, far more quietly. His mind was spiraling with speculation about whether Adam could have discovered his affair with Nikki and why he would even care. He supposed even if Adam was not physically attracted to her, maybe he still loved her? Or worse, maybe Adam was not there to confront Rick, but to warn Melanie. "Hello?" Adam called through the door. Rolling his eyes, Rick opened the front door but left the glass storm door closed between them and their neighbor. He did not want Adam to get the wrong impression and let himself in. "Hey, neighbor," Rick said through the glass. "Everything okay?" Adam scratched the back of his head and looked at his feet when he replied, "Yeah, hey, sorry. I know it's really late, but could I maybe, spend the night over here or, just stay for a little while until I can figure out what to do?" "Did you get locked out?" Rick asked at the same time Melanie asked, "Where's Nikki?" "Whoa," Adam said, grinning and raising his hands in mock defense. "No, and Nikki's at home. We just, got into a bit of an argument, and I think it would be better if I just wasn't there for a bit." "Oh, man, I'm sorry to hear that," Rick said, not sorry at all, nor surprised. According to Nikki, their marriage had been on the rocky road to divorce ever since Adam's announcement because, unfortunately, Nikki was not in a financial position to simply leave him. Melanie shrunk back. If Nikki kicked Adam out, she wasn't sure she wanted to automatically take him in. She knew Nikki pretty well, or so she thought, and thought she wasn't the type to do something so dramatic for the drama's sake alone. Rick continued the conversation on his own. He needed to tread carefully because if Adam did not know about his tryst with Nikki, then he probably also didn't know Rick knew his secret. "I don't want to pry, but is there any chance you two could work things out?" Rick asked. Adam shifted uncomfortably between his heels and shrugged. Rick said, "But she's okay, right?" This refocused Adam's wandering gaze. He hurried to say, "Of course, yes, we just needed some space to think things through." Rick said, "Got it. Could we help you find a hotel or something? It's just, the kids are already asleep and we don't really have a spare room for you to..." "Could I just hang out with you guys until she cools off?" Adam interrupted. Rick started, but Melanie tugged at his shirt. Before stepping aside, Rick said, "Just a sec." Standing behind the open front door, Melanie whispered, "I'm going to call Nikki. This is just too weird." "Sounds good. I agree, something seems off," said Rick, relieved he didn't have to say it. When he turned away from his wife's ear, he saw Adam standing within an inch of the glass door now, watching them. Melanie flitted away to find her phone. Hey," Rick started. "So look, man, we'd be happy to help you find a hotel, and I could even drive you there, but we just don't have..." "Could you open this?" Adam interrupted again. He put his fingers on the storm door's handle. Rick glanced at the lock to make sure it was secure. This flick of his eyes did not go unnoticed. Adam's eyes narrowed. Was he suspicious? Rick almost asked if he knew about the affair, but no answer, Melanie announced in an undertone from the living room. Rick nodded at her. Thinking fast, he said to Adam, "Could you wait here a second? I'm just going to grab my keys and I'll take you up to the Holiday Inn. They probably have a few rooms open and I bet they'll give you a fantastic rate this late." Adam locked eyes with Rick and twisted the door handle. The lock did its job. Adam pulled his hand back and arrested Rick with an uncertain stare. All of the forced friendliness fell from Rick's face. He denied his instinct to close and bolt the inner door due to a premonition that closing the door would not send Adam away. Melanie took charge of the awkward silence, saying, "Adam, go. You can't stay here. I'm sorry, I know that's not very neighborly of me, but if I let you inside, I'd be putting my kids at risk and..." Adam cut in. "At risk of what?" Melanie said, "I'm sorry, Adam. I know it's not fair, and I'm sorry if this ruins our friendship, but I'm just getting a weird feeling about this, and I'd really like to speak with Nikki before I..." "She's not going to talk to you. She's not going to talk to anybody. She kicked me out of the house and..." Rick cut him off. "Okay, that's enough. Good night, Adam. Good luck finding somewhere to crash." Adam sneered. He stepped close enough to the glass to touch his nose to it, and Rick started closing the inner door. In reaction, Adam lashed out with a hammer fist, banging the glass directly in the center of the pane. The glass rippled. Rick slammed the inner door and bolted it, then cautiously asked, "Still nothing from Nikki?" Melanie shook her head. "Nothing." "I don't know, should we call the police?" Melanie briefly considered this, sighing. "No, he's our neighbor. That was uncomfortable, but if he and Nikki actually got in a bad fight, he's probably not in his right mind. He'll cool off. I'm sure he'll drop by and apologize in the morning." She rolled her eyes at the very idea. Rick brushed her hand with his fingertips and asked, "Still want to watch a movie?" She nodded, giving him confidence to touch her upper back. He rubbed, saying, "I'll go get the stuff." Melanie sat on the couch and turned on the TV while Rick went to the kitchen. He used the hand towel hanging off of the oven door to wipe away the sweat forming under his hair, then froze. The door to the garage was about a quarter of the way open. He could see all the way through the garage to the night beyond and thought of Adam walking around outside, unhinged. Would he have actually broken in? Well, Rick supposed he had left the garage door up and it wasn't really breaking in if all someone had to do was open an unlocked door. He peered around the kitchen island, not finding anyone hiding there. That was about the only place a grown man could hide in the kitchen, and Rick knew he or Melanie would have noticed Adam walking through it. He decided Melanie must have simply failed to kick the door all the way shut when she brought the beers in. When he reached through the open door to close the garage itself, he caught a dark shape moving in his peripheral vision. He turned his head, but could define nothing in the darkness. He flipped the light on, ready to confront Adam, and threatened to call the police immediately if he didn't leave. Then he wanted to go make damn sure Nikki was okay. But when the light buzzed on, Rick did not see Adam lurking in his garage. He saw his daughter, Kelsey, crouched near the fridge. "What the hell are you doing up?" he demanded, making no effort to temper his anger. Then he noticed the ice cream sandwich clutched in Kelsey's hand. Kelsey said, "I smelled popcorn. It's not fair that you and Mom get to have dessert and I get nothing." Rick shouted, "Put that back. You almost gave me a heart attack sneaking around out here. Get up to your room now, and don't come out until the sun comes up. I don't care if you're thirsty, if you have to go to the bathroom. I don't want to see you again. Got it?" Rick stood aside to make room for Kelsey to slink by, and he yanked the frozen sandwich from her as she passed, adding, "And absolutely no dessert for the rest of the weekend." "What's going on?" Melanie asked. She now stood in the kitchen doorway. Her lips grew tight when she saw her baggy-eyed daughter. "She was trying to sneak an ice cream sandwich," said Rick. "Oh, Kelsey, just go back to bed. Besides, you did have ice cream right after dinner, remember?" Kelsey looked like she genuinely did not remember, but then said, "Oh yeah." The girl exited wordlessly and trudged up the stairs. "God, I need this," Rick exhaled as he picked up one of the Coronas and popped the lid off with the bottle opener mounted on the island. Melanie picked up the ice cream sandwich he'd left on the counter and put it in the freezer. He sensed it coming, the rebuke. She would tell him the same thing she always said. "You weren't wrong to be stern with her, but you need to get better at finding the line and not crossing it." He knew it was true. He was fully aware of his short and shortening temper when it came to the kids. He'd noticed himself becoming increasingly on edge the longer his affair with Nikki continued, and his temper was only one of the side effects. He decided to beat her to the punch, saying, "I know I shouldn't have said the bathroom thing." "She deserved a good punishment, but you can't tell a kid they can't use the bathroom, Rick." "I said I know." Rick opened another beer and handed it to his wife. She cocked the bottle back and, just before it touched her lips, uttered, "What a strange night." After Rick closed and locked the garage, they settled in to watch Poor Things. Or rather, Melanie settled in. Rick could not make his mind or body relax. He couldn't shake his concern for Nikki or, more prominently, the fear that his infidelity was going to be exposed any minute now. He occasionally reminded himself Adam would have no reason to want to hurt Nikki if he'd learned of the affair, but the insane look he had seen in his eyes bore no evidence of reason. During the third or fourth scene of the movie, Melanie jumped. "Oh, finally!" she shouted, almost dropping her vibrating phone in excitement. As she raised it to her ear, she mouthed, "Nikki," to Rick. "Nikki? Hey, where are you?" "You are? Wait, with who? Really?" Rick tapped her on the shoulder and whispered, "Speaker?" Melanie said, "Hold on, Nikki." She lowered the phone, tapped it, then held it up between herself and Rick. "You're on speaker with Rick," she said. "You said Adam is with you?" Adam's faded voice replied, "Hey Melanie, hey Rick." Before going on speakerphone, Nikki had told Melanie she and Adam were on a weekend getaway in Chicago and had just gotten back to their hotel. "You're in Chicago?" Rick asked, stupefied. What could they possibly be doing together in Chicago? Were they actually trying to hold their marriage together? "Like you should be," his guilty conscience whispered. He promptly shushed it. "Just until Sunday night," Adam replied. "All good in the neighborhood?" Melanie said, Not. Well, someone stopped by here earlier that looked just like you, Adam. That wasn't you?" "How much earlier?" Adam asked. "Right before she called," Rick answered distantly. "Definitely not," Adam assured them. And of course not. Adam could not possibly have knocked on their door around 10 and been in Chicago already. "You don't have a twin we don't know about, do you?" Melanie teased with forced humor. Adam laughed and assured her he was an only child. "Are you too sure everything's okay?" Nikki asked. Rick felt an edge in her voice cut at him. He said, Yeah, whoever it was seems to have left. Sure looked a lot like you though, Adam. You must have a doppelganger." Adam laughed. "Guess so. Hey, if you're worried he's going to come back, don't forget I've got a shotgun locked up in the garage. The safe uses the same combination as the garage door." "Oh, geez, I don't think we need to go that far," Rick chuckled. He hoped he didn't sound as juvenilely nervous as he felt. Adam laughed too. "Have a good night, guys." "You too," said Melanie, and she hung up. After their movie, the parents climbed into bed. Melanie in flowing pink pajamas, and Rick in a pair of black boxer shorts. No sooner had Rick pulled the sheet over them than a small knock tapped at their door. This one sounded far more familiar than the knock which had disturbed them earlier. "Come in," Rick groaned. The door swung open, and Dawson appeared. He looked about half his actual age, all pulled into himself, eyes wide and pleading. "Mom, Dad," he said, "I'm scared. Can I sleep in your bed?" "Scared of what?" asked Rick. Dawson had not asked to sleep with them in months. Rick thought he had outgrown it. It used to happen frequently, and back then, Rick always pretended to resent it, but secretly enjoyed sleeping next to him every once in a while. It reminded him of days past when the kids were little, helpless creatures, solely dependent on Mommy and Daddy. But now, the thought of digging up those nostalgic emotions nauseated Rick. Though he would not admit it to himself, those feelings made him feel existentially guilty about what could happen to his family. What would happen if and when he and Nikki were caught. He would have preferred Dawson continue his running streak of sleeping alone over wrestling with his guilty conscience any night, but especially that one. Unbeknownst to Rick, Melanie, who ordinarily caved immediately to Dawson's request to share their bed, felt a nagging urge to turn him away. For some reason, she didn't want to let him near her, but she blamed exhaustion and alcohol and said, "Come on in, sweetie. Did you have a nightmare or something?" The boy stood oddly still and made no response for about 5 seconds, then shrugged and climbed onto the bed. Rick begrudgingly moved to the very edge of the mattress and tried not to let Dawson touch him as he settled under the covers. Melanie blearily awoke a couple of hours later to something moving behind her back. First, she thought it was Rick. Then she remembered Dawson was in their bed. He tended to wake her up a few times throughout the night by bumping into her or talking in his sleep when he joined his parents in bed. Melanie rolled farther onto her side to create a little more space and closed her eyes to drift away again. A bony knee pressed into her kidney. In a burst of tired frustration, she reached behind herself and grabbed the offending limb to shove it away. But instead of warm skin, what she grabbed felt like a twisted, wet towel. She shrieked. She couldn't help it, and would have fallen out of the bed if one of her feet did not happen to land flat enough to catch her weight. She peered through the darkness at the shapes in the bed until they formed images. Images of her confused husband, slack-jawed and probably believing he was still in some dream, and her little boy, sleeping soundly in the middle. How he could have slept through her scream baffled Melanie, but Rick whispered to her before she had much of a chance to wonder about it. "What was that? Was that you?" Melanie whispered back. "Yes, Dawson just startled me." She could still feel that wet, fuzzy sensation if she thought about it, but thought it could not have been real. She could see Dawson now, perfectly dry, sleeping with nothing near him that she might have accidentally grabbed instead. Rubbing her hand on her pajamas, she slid back onto the bed. "Good night, Mommy," Dawson whispered. She whispered back, "Good night," but in the back of her mind thought, he hasn't called me Mommy in like 2 years. Where's this regression coming from? Try as she might, Melanie could not make herself sleep again. As she listened to her child breathing beside her, something sounded wrong. Something in the room just felt wrong. She felt an irrational desire to kick Dawson out of their bed, out of their room. He felt more intrusive than usual. Melanie wrestled with guilt over these feelings, but again blamed them on being overly tired. She decided, rather than laying there and berating herself for feelings outside of her control, she should get up and take a melatonin pill to see if that put her to sleep. She left the door open a crack and looked through it at Dawson's sleeping form one more time. Looking at him put a nauseating sensation in the back of her throat. Gazing at her son, for the first time, she felt no love. None at all. Wow, I really need sleep, she thought. The whole house felt weird to her. She peeked into Kelsey's room on her way to the bathroom where she kept the green bottle of melatonin. Her daughter's snores made her jealous. Melanie hoped a slumber as deep as Kelsey's awaited her, too. She quietly shut Kelsey's door, then paused outside of Dawson's room. She knew Dawson was sleeping back in her room. She had just left him there, after all. But she ignored her intuition to follow her instincts instead, and peered into his room, too. Dawson's door creaked and popped loudly when it opened. Rick promised 2 or 3 times per week that he would fix it, but kept forgetting. He seemed to be forgetting a lot of promises lately. Melanie only opened the loud door enough to peer at Dawson's bed. His curtains were drawn across the window, but failed to meet all the way in the middle. Blue moonlight cut through between them, the beam like a spotlight on Dawson's covers. Melanie watched, confused, as the blankets rose slowly, subtly, then fell. No. She pushed the door open further. It made an especially loud pop, and Melanie heard a snort from the bed. Suddenly, the blankets moved. They bulged, then rose and fell away from... "Dawson?" she whispered. Surely she must have been dreaming. Surely her eyes must have been deceiving her, because surely it could not be her little boy sitting on his bed staring back at her in the moonlight. She had just left Dawson behind in her own bed. However, when she looked at him now, bleary-eyed, confused, and only half awake, her heart was filled with love and a desire to protect. All the feelings she normally felt for her children, which had been so notably absent when she looked at Dawson in her own bed, were present once more. "Mom?" Dawson croaked. "Stay here," she ordered. On second thought, she added, "Put some clothes on. I think we need to leave." "Why?" "Please, just get dressed. I'll explain in a minute." Melanie left Dawson's room and returned to Kelsey's. She opened the door, making no effort to do so quietly, and loudly whispered, "Kelsey, wake up!" Her daughter stirred, but fell right back into heavy slumber. Melanie crossed the room and shook the girl harder than may have been necessary, but she needed her to wake up and wake up now. "Kelsey?" she asked as her daughter opened her eyes and squinted to see in the dark. "Mom?" "Hey, get dressed and take your brother downstairs. He's already awake and I told him to get dressed too." "What's going on?" Kelsey asked. Her eyes rolled back, causing Melanie to give her another light shake to keep her from falling back asleep. Kelsey sputtered, then opened her eyes all the way. "Just get dressed and go downstairs," Melanie repeated. "I'll explain later." She left Kelsey's room and now stood outside of her own. She could hear sounds coming from behind the door, and through the small crack she left open, she saw movement. "Rick?" she whispered. The sounds and movement stopped. Melanie took a step forward and leaned toward the door. A small amount of moonlight was cutting through she and Rick's curtains too. Not enough to illuminate the room, but enough to reflect off a pair of eyes floating above the bed. Melanie shoved the door open and flipped on the light, but nothing happened because the lights had been turned off with the ceiling fan's drawstring. Rick jerked awake, pinned down by a dark figure straddling him. Melanie screamed, "That's not our son!" Rick turned his head drowsily to look at the figure sitting on his chest and immediately shoved it off of himself and kicked. The undefined figure tumbled onto the floor, landing in a heap of mismatched limbs. It wore Dawson's face as it rose to its feet, but the face stretched and morphed as if struggling to maintain its shape. The thing rose well above Dawson's height. As it grew, Melanie caught glimpses of other familiar faces. Adam from next door, Rick, Kelsey, and others she did not immediately know. Its eyes drifted apart and its mouth expanded. "Go, run!" Rick shouted at his wife. She didn't move until he shoved her through the door before passing through it himself and slamming it shut behind them. The kids were standing in the hallway, dazed but fully dressed. Melanie ushered them toward the stairs. The bedroom doorknob turned. Rick grabbed it, held it steady, and leaned back. He shouted after Melanie, "Get over to the Eccles house and call 911. The garage code is 3818, Melanie finished for him. She did not want to leave him holding the door alone, but she had to make sure the kids were safe before she could help him. She followed them down the stairs to the front door. Kelsey opened it, but Melanie stopped her before she went outside. "Take this," she said, handing Kelsey her cell phone. "Go next door to Adam and Nikki's house. They're not home, but use code 3818 to get into the garage. Close it after you get in there, okay? Once you're safe, call 911 and send them to our house." "What's going on?" asked Dawson. "Someone broke in. Now hurry." Kelsey shrieked, "What?" But Melanie shoved her out the door. "Your dad and I will be there soon." She pushed Dawson onto the porch and shut the door behind him. Upstairs, she heard Rick yell like a man warding off a charging bear. She charged up the stairs, nearly tripping at the top. Rick still held the door shut, but every time the intruder yanked on it, it opened an additional half an inch. Melanie guessed it would not be long before the intruder ripped the knob from Rick's hands. "What do you want?" she screamed after the door slammed again. Within the room, the creature shrieked and chittered unintelligible alien vocalizations. Melanie hurried to help Rick brace against the door. He asked, "Are the kids safe?" Melanie nodded. Behind the door, Dawson's unmistakable voice said, "They're next door, hiding in the garage." Then Kelsey's said, "I know how to find them." "Rick?" Melanie pleaded. He whispered, Go be with them. Remember what Adam said about you know." He dared not mention Adam's gun out loud, although he wondered if they could truly hide anything from the impossible creature on the other side of the door. Melanie said, "I told them to call 911. Help is on the way. Just hold on." Then hurried back down the stairs. Behind the bedroom door, Rick heard the creature mimic Melanie's voice now, saying, "It's finally time for you to confront the truth." "Stop this," Rick begged. "I don't know why you're attacking my family, but please, we haven't done anything to you." The creature adopted Adam's voice now and said, "Your guilt makes you fear your own neighbor." Then, copying Kelsey's, said, "You've been so angry, Daddy." And finally, with Dawson's voice, it whispered, "You used to love me, but now I think you hate me." Rick, growling under the strain of gripping the knob, demanded, "What the hell are you?" The door burst open. What emerged from the shadows looked like every person the being had impersonated blended together at the bottom of a kaleidoscope. Eyes blinked on its chest, forehead, and shoulders. Ears grew out of its head, yes, but also its forearms and hands in between rows of diverse mouths. Its throat was lined on all sides with various noses of all shapes, sizes, and colors. A mane of multicolored hair spilled from a mouth on top of its head. But when the monster stepped forward into the pale light of the hallway, forcing Rick back against the wall, it took a new form. What now stood before Rick was a naked, sunken, and hideous version of himself. Its skin looked ghostly pale, except around its eyes and mouth, where dark bags-like bruises outlined those features. Black veins bulged under the translucent skin, pulsing in ripples. As if growing out of the veins themselves, the hair on the creature's head elongated and fell over its shoulders. Its eyebrows thinned and arced, and its cheekbones rose until Rick could not tell whether he was looking at his own face or Nikki's. "What are you? Is this some kind of trick?" Rick demanded. Looking around, he yelled, "Adam, are you doing this? Mel? What's happening?"
"Don't you recognize me?"
the creature asked in a double voice that paralleled its hybrid face.
"You've been fighting against me for so long while I've slowly overtaken you. You knew I would win eventually."
"What are you talking about?" Rick felt for Kelsey's doorway. If he could slip into her room and close the door, he could... But wait, the kids' rooms didn't have locks on the doors. If he wanted to escape, he would have to run downstairs and... lead this thing directly to the kids? The creature continued,
"Come on, Rick. Don't you recognize your own guilty conscience? You've been feeding me well, making me strong, but I cannot survive any longer as a parasite leeching on your soul. I have outgrown you, and now, to survive, I must consume all that is left of you."
"3818, Melanie spoke aloud as she entered the code into the gun safe in Adam and Nikki's garage. The kids were both in tears, standing behind her. She had tried to answer their questions as best she could, but wanted answers herself. Her main priority was unlocking Adam's gun so she could return to help Rick. The police were on the way. She hoped the mere presence of the gun would be enough of a deterrent to keep the intruder from hurting any of them further before they arrived. The safe popped open. A single shotgun rested upright inside, and 3 boxes of shells lined the bottom of the safe. She took out the gun, dumped one of the boxes out on the floor, and picked up 2 shells. She loaded them into the gun, struggling to remember how her father had shown her to do it when she was a kid. Succeeding, she turned back to her terrified children. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, do not leave the garage until either me, Dad, or the cops come get you. Got it?" They nodded. "Good. I'm going to go get your dad." She scampered to the garage door button mounted on the wall, but before she pressed it, the motor kicked on by itself. In a chorus of screeches and rattles, the garage door rose. Melanie raised the shotgun. "Stay behind me," she whispered. "But Mom," said Dawson, the shortest of them all and the first to see the face of the man behind the rising door. "It's Dad." Melanie lowered the gun and sighed with relief. Dawson was right. But something still seemed wrong. Rick did not look relieved at all to see his family safe. He looked sorrowful. A nasty sneer momentarily pulled at his downturned lips, but he appeared to fight off whatever emotion spawned it and stepped forward. "Melanie," he said. She renewed her grip on the gun. The tickle of unfamiliarity she noticed when Dawson asked to sleep with them returned, this time emanating from her husband. "Are you really Rick?" she demanded. She tipped the shotgun's barrel forward slightly. "Yes," Rick answered. He took another unsteady step forward. "Melanie, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about everything that you're going to learn. But right now I still have control, and I'm not sure for how much longer." "Rick, you're scaring me," Melanie quivered. Rick looked at his children's hopeful eyes as tears brimmed in his like the edges of infinity pools. He said, "Go inside, kids. I need to talk to Mom alone. Whatever you hear, don't come out until Mom tells you to. But hey, listen. I love you both so much, okay? I love you." Melanie, holding back her own tears, whispered, "Rick, what's wrong?" Watching the kids go into Adam and Nikki's house, Rick said, "It wants me to unburden myself to you, but I know if I do that, it's going to try to destroy you too." "I don't know what you're talking about, Rick, but let me help you. The police are almost here. Don't you hear the sirens?" "Yes, Melanie, I hear them. That's why you need to be quick. You need to tell them I attacked you, okay? You need to tell them I went insane and..." "Rick, stop. And I chased you over here and..." "Please, I don't understand." "And you had to shoot me." "What?" "Melanie, shoot me." Rick lunged forward and grabbed the shotgun. Melanie let go, but Rick pressed the stock against her shoulder and put the muzzle to his forehead. He begged, "Please, I don't know how much longer I can control it." Melanie screamed, "I'm not going to shoot you." The sirens reached a piercing pitch and 2 police cars squealed around the corner. One stopped in front of the Stevensons' house, but the officer in the second car noticed the scene in the Eccles garage and stopped short. She kicked open her door and belted, "Put the gun on the ground and raise your hands in the air." Melanie glanced away from her husband long enough to see the officer had drawn her gun and was pointing it at her. Rick checked her gaze and noted the same. He immediately released his grip and stepped back, raising his hands in the air as instructed. "Don't shoot her," he yelled at the approaching officer. Her partner had joined her in the Eccles driveway and now pointed his weapon at Melanie too. Rick shouted, "Please, she's innocent." Melanie raised one hand and slowly set the shotgun back in the safe with the other. Rick stepped out of the garage into the driveway with one final glance back at his wife, knowing how he was about to shatter her. He hoped she might never uncover his affair, not for the sake of his own memory, but for her own peace of mind. She would likely go to the grave, never understanding what he was about to do, but she could not have known the power of the force which had infested him and now threatened to take over entirely. To Melanie, whom he now remembered a deep love for, he mouthed, "I'm sorry." Then he turned to the officers, lowered his hands to his sides, and charged. Melanie was smarter than her late husband had given her credit for in his final moment. Between comforting the kids and helping them process their grief, speaking with detectives and planning Rick's funeral, she pieced together that whatever had snaked its way into their home that night through lies and disguises had possessed Rick after forcing her to leave him alone with it. She could not share this knowledge with anyone, especially the authorities, without sounding crazy, so she kept it to herself. She planned to tell Kelsey and Dawson when they were old enough, whenever that might be. She wanted them to share in the knowledge of how their father had sacrificed himself to save them all, and not spend their lives believing he had lost his mind as they needed to for the time being. At Rick's wake, Melanie noticed Nikki lingering for a little too long by the closed casket. After the burial, Nikki handed her a letter and told her to open it if she ever felt the need to. She rightly assumed Melanie would understand her implication. But Melanie burned that letter over the sink the same night. In her heart, she already knew the basics of what it said. She had witnessed the way his guilty conscience had changed Rick. She had seen it corrupt him over the past weeks and months. And for that, she would need time, a lot of time, to forgive him. But Rick's guilty conscience died with him. And Melanie decided she had been its victim long enough. You made it out. Congratulations. If you enjoyed the story, please rate, like, review, or subscribe. For ad-free episodes and bonus Into the Woods episodes, become a patron with the link in the description. You can also support the show by buying merch. That link is also in the description below. To stay up to date, follow me on Instagram at The Warning Woods. If you feel ready, meet me here next week for another journey into the Warning Woods. Thank you for listening.